I don't identify as a Republican, but what I've seen over the past several years in the legal system has opened my eyes up of what's going on, and I'm not okay with this.
What do you think about Putin?
I have some pretty offensive things to say. Ukraine's very corrupt. If anybody's been there before, especially prior to the war, I would argue is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Europe is whining and bitching about how they're not involved in these negotiations right now for agreement between Russia and the US. Well, hello, Europe. The EU specifically did not invite Russia to the peace agreements that were supposedly going on in 2022 and 2023. And now Europe is pissed off that they're not included in a peace agreement between the US and Russia over Ukraine. It's the most hypocritical thing you can think of geopolitically.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Capitalist Podcast. My name's Austin Bronner. The Adventure Capitalist Podcast is for the uncommon man. We discuss global trends, hidden investment opportunities, adventures, and ways to live an exciting life. And I'm here with my co-host, Cody Shirk. We are back from Austin, Texas. Are you thawing out a little bit?
I mean, I can hear it in your voice that the cold really affected you. I mean, I'm not built for cold, and I got to tell you, I was miserable there the entire time. So I don't want to exaggerate, but what was the warmest the entire time?
I think it might have hit like 32, 30,
Okay.
37, something like that. It was freezing. We had this great dinner we hosted in Austin, and yeah, I was hoping I was going to fly in and get that nice like 70-degree Austin February, and no, it was like, I think the feels like temperature was like 12 or like 15 degrees when we first got there.
Yeah, when I landed, it was 12 in the parking garage at Austin Airport. The wind was whipping through there. I didn't have like a jacket out of my luggage yet.
No, you
my
were
hands
completely
were all
unprepared.
my hands were all like stubby, like I was like fumbling with the zipper, and I was all pissed off and like cold and angry. It was not the Austin visit in terms of the weather that I had hoped for.
Yeah, I was like, you were dressed for like cold weather in Florida, not cold weather in Texas.
Yeah, I know everyone had their puff jacket out, and I left my puff jacket at home, but I needed the puff jacket.
You need a puff jacket. Texas is cold. But yeah, no, we had an excellent dinner. We had about 18 people come out. We'd rented out this really cool underground, what used to be a brewery, and we, met a bunch of cool people. We had a great night, super fun. And I think one of the things I love about Austin is there's just so much exciting energy in Austin. I think it's one of the best places in the US right now, with just people who are excited about entrepreneurship and making things happen. What was your read on? I know you've been in and out of Austin, but what was your read on the city?
I'm going to be honest. Austin is not my favorite city, probably because it's not near the ocean. So I'm extremely biased. But even though it's not my favorite city, I will give in and admit there for sure is an energy there. It's almost a little bit like San Francisco, where you can tell that there's a younger demographic that's hungry, wants to work, and is creative. And I think that's important, because a critique of Austin is that there are some elements like San Francisco. There's like some grungy parts of the city. Yeah. And I don't know what the perfect, ingredients are to make a blooming, creative, dynamic society. But I do know that societies that are super, vanilla, Pleasantville, there is that missing like creative element. And I think Austin has that. So there's a kind of an interesting balance there. So anyways, my read is that even though it's not my favorite city, I just know that things are happening there, and you can just tell by the energy of the people on the street. Even if it was freezing cold, like things were still happening. And a side note, we're not going to talk about this episode, but Apple just announced they're investing $500 billion over the next 4 years. And a lot of that was going to be near Houston for AI data centers. But of course, a lot of that's going to overflow into Austin as well, which is this talent continuing to move to Texas, companies continuing to go to Texas, and Austin being the capital is naturally going to have a lot of tailwinds there. So yeah, that's my read on the city.
Yeah, it's great. I love I think a lot of it comes down to just young people have moved there, and it's a place where the American dream is alive. And you flew directly from Austin to Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
So I'm super interested. How was your trip to Mar-a-Lago? Did you get to meet Trump, or what was your how did it go? And why did you go?
I went there for an event. I won't go into it too much. If you want to know what it was, reach out to me personally. But let's just say it was a fundraising event to bring awareness to some specific legal things that are going on. And Trump was not there, but there were a lot of people that were there that are in that circle. And so, first of all, Mar-a-Lago as a property, I'd never been there before. I've been pretty much all over Palm Beach Island, but I'd never been in Mar-a-Lago. I gotta admit, man, it is stunning. It's unbelievable. The ballrooms, the dinner rooms, the everything. The grounds they're incredible. So the accusation or whatever you want to call it about
the opposite of Austin, there's not any grunge.
No, there's no grunge there. If you're looking for grunge, Mar-a-Lago is not where you're going to find it. But what I was going to mention is the valuation that was put on that property. I think it was like 20 million. You know, there was that whole scandal about it. This sounds like an exaggeration, but that place is probably close to $1 billion, because you have properties next door selling for 200-300 million that are a fraction of what Mar-a-Lago is. And I got to say, I was just blown away. And that's besides the event, besides the politics, just the property itself was stunning. It was very, very cool.
So who do you, like, any interesting insights from your time there?
Yeah. So my biggest takeaway, and this is me not trying to just rage about MAGA, is that a lot of the people there were not your traditional, Trump supporting, flag waving, traditional redneck Americans that everybody has a stereotypical view about when they think of a Trump supporter. A lot of the people there were centrists and some Democrats that had been, quote, red pilled, orange pilled, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. And the event specifically, I won't go too deep into it, but it was about all the district attorneys across the U.S. who have been put in place over the past 4 years, and how a lot of murderers and violent offenders have been let off over the past 4 years, and how a lot of the cities have deteriorated. And this event was to bring attention to that, and also say, we need to change this, or we need to at least have some responsibility and go back to rule of law within the United States. So a lot of the people there were not your hardcore Republicans. They were kind of centrists that said, you know what, I don't identify as a Republican, but what I've seen over the past several years in the legal system has opened my eyes up of what's going on behind the scenes, and I'm not okay with this. I want law and order back, and I'm going to attend this event here at Mar-a-Lago because I'm supporting what we're trying to do here, which is just bring reasonable responsibility back to the U.S. and prosecute people who do bad things, and not tolerate a society that just kind of, oh, you killed somebody, you can get out of jail on bail, or, oh, you stole things, that's no big deal. That's not okay, and that's not a society that's going to thrive. And the people there, I think, understood that, and they were from a demographic I didn't expect to be there. So that was my biggest takeaway.
Interesting. And any specific things that they're pushing, policies or calls to action?
So John Walsh, who's the guy from America's Most Wanted, he was one of the speakers, and his specific message was that, which is specifically going after violent offenders and the policies they're trying to push, which is, hey, obviously people were not from around Palm Beach who attended. They flew in from all over the U.S. They were saying, hey, go back to your local town, city, state, whatever, and stand up, because John Walsh, who everyone's seen America's Most Wanted, I feel like that was a very 90s thing when we were growing up. Always watched that show. Yeah. His son was murdered. His son was 6 years old and murdered. And John Walsh started that show as an inspiration, because the whole thing kind of got lost in the legal system. And it just goes to show this has been an issue much longer than Trump and Biden and everything. It's been an issue for a long time. And America's Most Wanted, the show, has been responsible for the arrests and prosecutions of over 1,000 people from cold cases and stuff throughout the U.S. So his message was basically, hey, if you see a problem in your local community, don't think you're too small. Don't think you're a nobody. Everything matters. So go back to wherever you're from. Make sure that you don't put up with this bullshit, and make sure that you stand up for what's right. Exactly. So
Yeah.
that was the the bigger picture of the evening. Of course, there was all kinds of sub conversations and interesting people who were there to push side agendas, and it was like the classic. I don't know what you call it, but I guess Mar-a-Lago networking
The political
event.
mixer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was
Well,
fun though.
Talk a little bit about. I'd love to hear about West Palm Beach, right? Because you're there. It's a city that has been booming. I know they talked. There's been news about West Palm Beach and how much investment's going on. Tell us a little bit about what are your thoughts on where it's going?
So West Palm Beach is to the west of Palm Beach, and it sounds kind of weird if you've never been in the area, but it's a mile away. There's a bridge that connects Palm Beach to West Palm Beach, and actually, my buddy Peter Santinello just put a video out about this on YouTube. You can look it up. He drives from Palm Beach to Belglade, which is all in Palm Beach County, and it's the starkest contrast you could possibly think. You have uber wealth, and then Belglade, he said, is one of the gnarliest cities he's ever seen, and he's been all over like Pakistan and Iraq and North Africa, and he said Belglade is like the gnarliest city he's ever been to. And so West Palm Beach has had an element of this really gritty, kind of dangerous element to it. And it's a mile away from these billionaire homes. So that's the reputation that West Palm Beach has had in the past. But recently, there's been an enormous amount of investment coming into the city. And I have a lot of friends who call me up who still live in California, New York, and they always talk about moving to Florida. They always kind of kick the can around. Hey, should I do it? And this is my call to everybody. You should do it. So here's what's going on right now. Stephen Ross, who is the founder of Related. If you're in the real estate world or an investor, you've probably heard of the Related companies. They are responsible for doing all kinds of major real estate projects around the world, throughout Dubai. They did the Hudson Yards project in New York. They've done tons of stuff in LA. But Stephen Ross lives in Palm Beach, and it's his pet project now to transform West Palm Beach. And he is personally putting in $10 billion into the city. And he told the city council, West Palm Beach City Council, he said, I'm going to spend money like a drunken sailor. I'm quoting this. And the West Palm Beach City Council, who previously is not really familiar with this much money coming into the city, was like, okay, like, what does that mean? And he's putting his money where his mouth is. So there's a great article put out in Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago articulating or demonstrating all of the projects going on in West Palm Beach right now. He's attracted, Goldman Sachs, all kinds of hedge funds, all kinds of major companies coming to West Palm Beach to occupy these buildings that he's building right now. And of course, this is bringing in all kinds of other talent and interested parties to the city. So my call to anybody who's interested in Florida is go to West Palm Beach before you go to Miami. And that's also Stephen Ross's second theory, is that Miami's becoming more crowded and congested, and it's still kind of got this tourist vibe. And for a lot of people who live in Florida, like, I don't like Miami. It's just a kind of a cluster. I get frustrated every time I'm there. He believes majority of business is going to continue to flow towards West Palm Beach because it's less congested, but also because they're kind of starting fresh and there's a real business scene within West Palm Beach right now.
Interesting. Yeah, I had there's a very interesting interview on the Ezra Klein podcast this last week with, he's the Massachusetts, I want to say senator, and he was talking about how the left, the Democrats have kind of like lost the monopoly on big ideas. And one of his ideas is that you need to like create these interesting cities that people want to move to that are walking cities.
Yep.
Right? Like, can we find a place? And his perspective is, let's do it from a like state level, right? Either a governor being like, okay, we're going to build a car-free city. And I think it's interesting to see these ideas broken up, where you've got on maybe further on the right, people who are just doing it, right? They're creating their own cities because they're investing and, building things because it's kind of a more of a pet project.
You can just do things. And
you just do things.
Let me throw some numbers out there for everybody, and then we'll get off the Palm Beach topic. But Stephen Ross is building 1.4 million square feet of condos, 700,000 square feet of retail and restaurant space, 870 hotel rooms.
Wow.
And this is across 70 acres of land. And the big number is 6 million square feet of office space. He has brought in a new hospital. He personally invested 10% of the project, which was 50 million. So the total project's 500 million, and it's a full-on Cleveland clinic. And he brokered the deal to help bring Vanderbilt University, who has agreed to spend $500 million within downtown West Palm Beach. So this is, bringing a major university, bringing a major hospital, bringing in millions of square feet of retail, commercial, and condo space. So he's just doing stuff. You can just do things, and that's what he's doing. Good for him.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see where it goes. I want to transition to get into some of the stuff on our list today. Starting with this week in geopolitics, right? We often dive into a couple of the interesting stories from the week on the geopolitical side of things. One of the most interesting stories that came out this week is that China continues to go and kind of cut these cables, these undersea cables linking the west and east. So Taiwan's Coast Guard detained a cargo ship and its Chinese crew after an undersea cable in the Taiwan Strait was damaged on Tuesday, saying that it cannot rule out the possibility it was a deliberate gray zone act. We talk about gray zone. We've had this discussion on the podcast before. It's like, it's not necessarily war, but it's
the non-war war.
Non-war war, right? It's hostile interference. Same thing happened about a month ago, cutting undersea cables. This has happened to these Taiwan undersea cables over 30 times in the past 5 years. So they're cutting cables from Taiwan to China. I believe that's where they're cutting these things. Same thing's been happening.
And they also did one from Taiwan to the U.S. So they're
cutting
any
them
cable
off.
there. They just want to slice.
They want to cut them off. Same thing's been happening in the Baltic Sea, right? Multiple cables have been, quote, accidentally cut by this shadow fleet of Russians or people affiliated with China and Russia. And at least 10 of these cables have been cut in the Baltic Sea since 2023. Really interesting gray zone action here. First of all, Cody, like, what is the plan here? Like, why do you think that they're doing this? And are we doing the same thing?
I think we are doing the same thing, but in probably more sophisticated levels. I'm not saying we're better. I just think we have a different tactic. And the best episode to listen to that we've done with Sean McFate, which is, he explains this non-war war that's going on, where China specifically, but Russia to a lesser extent, is doing these things that you can't really point to and say this is a declaration of war, but you're also like, what the heck, guys? And this has been going on in South China Sea with China specifically. They're harassing the Philippines, their Coast Guard, they're harassing Taiwan, and these cable cutting incidents, how they're happening is that they have these shadow fleets of these ships. And to be clear, these ships are not Russian or China registered.
And not military.
They're not military, and they're owned by multiple different shell companies, but the crews of these ships are typically Chinese or Russian, and they have strong ties to Chinese or Russian financing. And what they do, it's the most, like, I don't want to say barbaric, but simple plan. The ship goes along in the ocean. Right before there's a cable, the ship slows down. They drop their anchor so it hits the seafloor, and then they speed up and they drag their anchor across the seafloor, and it rips these cables up. And if it happened once or twice, it's like, oh, it's a mistake. This happens every now and then. It's a mistake. But this is, I mean, it happened over 30 times in the past 5 years for Taiwan. And they have ship tracking, just like you have flight trackers. They have the same thing for ships. They can see the ship's course. They can see it goes directly to the cable. They can see it slows down. They then take pictures of the ship after the incident. They can see that the anchors are often ripped off the ship so the chain breaks. And they can see damage along the ship's bow where the chain was smashing against the bow while they're dragging the anchor along the ground. And it's just, the evidence is so clear of what they're doing. And again,
these, quote, accidentally cut.
Right. And this has happened over 30 times the past 5 years in the Taiwan Strait, and then in the Baltic Sea. This has happened on every single cable between Finland and Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia. So it's very clear what China and Russia are doing. They're just like poking the hornet's nest. They're just doing this, non-war war. And it's probably kind of working for them right now. So I expect to see much more of this going into the future. And the last thing on this topic was that Meta, if everyone's thinking, oh, Starlink's going to take over. No, actually, like 99% of all intercontinental internet traffic goes through these cables. And Meta has recently announced that they're going to drop 31,000 miles of subsea cable around the world. It's going to be the largest undersea cable project in the world. And they just announced this. So my point is that many more projects are going to happen like this. And I'm sure Russia and China and any other nefarious actors are going to continue to screw with these projects. So we're going to see more of this.
I find it very interesting. It's like, what is the goal here? Just like continued cutting off of Taiwan, just flexing, it's setting them back in some way. I think that's maybe one of the main things. But I want to transition a little bit, because outside of South China Sea, moving back to the other big kind of hotbed is Ukraine and Russia. And so much has been happening over there in the last couple of weeks. Discussions related to whether or not a deal is going to get done to have a ceasefire. There's Trump saying, hey, we made a lot of progress. There's Putin saying, we've had discussions, but not a lot of progress towards the actual ceasefire. And then the big one that is in the news right now is these minerals in Ukraine. So I want to dive into this because it's quite interesting, and there's a lot of kind of complications related to this negotiation around minerals. So Ukraine is home to approximately 5% of the world's critical minerals. Titanium, they have the largest reserve in Europe. Lithium, they have one of Europe's largest confirmed reserves. And then there's a bunch of other valuable minerals, beryllium, manganese, uranium, all these different minerals. And this discussion's been going on between Trump and Zelensky has been around this mineral deal, right? And it's interesting because it's now in the forefront, but there's been a lot of this whole war, right? You can track back to people like, what's the guy's name? The South Carolina congressman Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham comes out and he says, initially, the warmonger Lindsey Graham. Oh, we got to support Ukraine, their fight for democracy, all yada, yada, yada. It's super important for us to support Ukraine. And then after that kind of blows up and we realize, well, it's not really that democratic over there, he comes out and says directly, well, the whole thing is about minerals. This is back when Biden was in office. So now it's kind of at the forefront. Trump and Zelensky are talking about this mineral potential deal. Trump proposed that the U.S. should receive $500 billion worth of Ukrainian minerals as compensation. And then the U.S. offered kind of a 50-50 revenue split with 50% ownership of Ukraine's rare earth metals. Zelensky said, no, I can't do this, can't sell it out, can't sell our state. But these negotiations are continuing. This week, Putin actually inserted himself in the deal and said, hey, listen, we'd actually be interested in doing some business with the U.S. and selling minerals that are in Ukraine, in our part of Ukraine that we've seized. Now, the big sticking point with this deal, and what I find to be interesting, is that Ukraine wants security guarantees from the U.S. The U.S. is open to saying, hey, like, we will help you in some way, but they also don't want to offer security guarantees, because the more security guarantee that they offer, the more it pisses off Russia. So they're in this kind of weird negotiation right now to try to figure out, okay, can we do something that Ukraine is excited about to create some sort of a long-term deal? And again, why is Ukraine interested in this? Well, if they give some sort of a contract to the U.S. about the minerals, well, then the U.S. has a vested interest in making sure that the same people who gave that contract to the U.S. are at least somewhat in power, or there's stability in Ukraine, because there is a vested interest in Ukraine of maintaining this mineral opportunity. So what do you think about Putin
This are we going to get
inserting
into
himself?
this right now? Are we going to get into like a Ukraine debate right now? Because I have some pretty offensive things to say that I haven't really said ever before, and I don't. Should we talk about this? Should we get into this Ukraine deal?
We're here. What? Yeah. First of all, what do you think about Putin inserting himself in the deal, saying, "Hey, we're willing to sell minerals to Ukraine, or sorry, to the U.S. and work with the U.S."
This is classic Putin. I have said it before about how when you look at world politicians, there's very few actual politicians globally. There's a lot of glorified community service leaders, and most of them are heads of state in countries that are in the secondary position, meaning they're following the U.S.'s lead or a different country's lead. Putin's a legit politician. I don't agree with him, but this is a perfect example of him inserting himself to make a deal of like this backhanded, crazy scenario where all of a sudden
it's also interesting because he kind of secures their area, right? He says, "Listen, like we'll do business. We're ready to do business in our area that we have of Ukraine. We've already seized."
Yep, and of course, he's going to justify that the people on the ground there side with the Russians anyways, and he's, liberating them and on, and whatever's happening on the ground, that's up for debate. But the point is, this is a perfect example of why Putin's good at what he does. So what do I think about it? I mean, this is classic Putin. This is classic Russian strategy, which is to always try and expand the empire and create scenarios where they are in a strong position. And like, no matter what you think, the guy's good at it. The Russian economy doesn't even crack the top 10 GDPs in the world, yet they're somehow still a major player when it comes to power moves and expansion and global power. So how is that possible? How is that possible if they don't have an economic engine that's in the top 10, but they're somehow world power? And the answer is they're really good at doing deals, and he's a good politician.
And they got a strong military.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question, but like that's my take. He's good at it, and it doesn't surprise me at all. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see some things come out in the next couple of months that are even more, say, shocking from the West, but require the West to do a deal with Putin because he's playing these games that he's really good at.
I also think this goes back to, I mean, there's this belief that he, is this kind of rogue actor who just wants to expand, and that, the big lie that we were told, I believe it's a lie, is that the reason we need to stop him in Ukraine is because he's going to roll through Ukraine, then roll through Poland, roll through Western Europe. That's his main goal. What my take on this is that we're actually seeing where his real like loyalties lie, which is at the end of the day, it's kind of the same thing that people laugh when they were told that he actually asked Clinton if they could be in NATO. This was years ago. He was like, "Listen, can we be in NATO? Like, we want to be in NATO." And NATO was initially formed as kind of a resistance to Russia, right? That was the entire goal of NATO, is we'll form an alliance and then we'll make sure that we can take on Russia. And he was like, "Well, can I be in it?" And I think it's kind of the same thing here. He's like, he wants to be involved with these deals, and to me, it pours water on that theory that he wants to rush through Ukraine, Poland, and continue to move and expand. It's like, well, maybe, but maybe he just would like to do what's best for his people, which would do more business with the U.S.
Yeah, and I mean, just to dive into the part about Ukraine that drives me crazy is that Ukraine's very corrupt. It's extremely corrupt. And if anybody's been there before, especially prior to the war, I would argue is one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
I don't even think it's an argument. It is one of the most corrupt countries in the entire world.
Right. So the idea that we should be, when I say we, the U.S. and the West should be unwaveringly backing this country without actually asking questions of what's currently going on, but also what was going on prior to everything, is a bit like you're playing an oblivious game to the larger picture, which is we just took a side because it happens to be against Russia, and we're not actually asking questions about what's going on in the middle. I think one really important video for anybody to watch, you can search this online, in 2014, when there was the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, which was absolutely supported by the U.S., Lindsey Graham and John McCain and several other major politicians were literally in Maidan Square watching everything happen. There's video of it. They're up on this high rise looking down the window, and they're watching this like riot happen. in the middle of Kyiv, and they're cheering it on. They're like, yay, they're having a revolution. They're going to get this Russian-backed leader out of power, out of Russia, which, by the way, he was picked up by helicopter, escaped to Russia in 2014. And then there was a Western leader ruling Ukraine. And so going back to the cable cutting idea of, is the U.S. doing similar things to what Russia and China are doing the cables? Yes, we absolutely are. And that's a good example. We're helping overthrow governments and place Western favored leaders in power in certain countries. And Ukraine is a perfect example of that. Ukraine just happens to be literally at the meeting point between the East and the West, between Russia and Asia, between Russia and Europe. And a really good example is Lviv. Lviv is on the western part of Ukraine. Lviv has been a part of 5 different countries in the past century. I don't know them exactly, but it's Ukraine, Austria-Hungary, Poland, Russia, and then a 5th one. But the point is the border's been adjusting multiple times in the past century. So this idea that Ukraine is not somehow, has influence on the ground from other parts and we should just blindly back them is a huge mistake for the U.S. and the majority of the people who are waving the Ukrainian flag in the United States, not really understanding what's going on the ground there, I think is a huge blind spot for a lot of Americans.
I think Zelensky's cooked. He's got basically nothing, no chips to bargain. Some of these meetings he hasn't even been in, right? They're just talking purely between Russia and the U.S. to try to figure out how to make this thing happen. And
And Europe's not involved. That's another big topic about this. Europe is whining and bitching about how they're not involved in these negotiations right now for a peace settlement, for an agreement between Russia and the U.S. Well, hello, Europe. The EU specifically did not invite Russia to the peace agreements that were supposedly going on in 2022 and 2023. And now Europe is pissed off that they're not included in a peace agreement between the U.S. and Russia over Ukraine. It's the most hypocritical thing you can think of geopolitically. And the last thing I'll finish with, as far as whatever's happening between the U.S. and Russia, this is a perfect example of why Russia is still a world power. At the end of the day, it's 2 nations that aren't Ukraine figuring out how the war in Ukraine is going to be settled. The people that are on the ground aren't even involved in this conversation. And it just goes to show what's really going on and who holds the power and who actually does diplomacy. The reality is there is no diplomacy in Ukraine. There's really no diplomacy in Europe right now because diplomacy is not blindly backing something or some initiative. Diplomacy is talking with the other side, even if it's your enemy, to come to some sort of agreement for peace. And for Trump, he views this as a business deal. And in a business deal, you don't get everything you want. But people who want to blindly back Ukraine want to get everything that they think should happen, which is push Russia out beyond the border. And it's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It is not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And I still believe it's going to get settled here pretty soon. It seems like there's more momentum than there's been in a long time. I imagine there's going to be some fits and stops, but I imagine it's going to. It seems like there's momentum to get things settled. It doesn't seem like a win for it to continue as it goes. But it's interesting because we're looking at kind of some of the markets this week, and there's markets are spooked, especially in the U.S. And you look kind of across the board, all things are down in the U.S. except gold. Gold's up. Gold's almost at the all-time high. Solana's down. On the crypto side of things, Solana's down almost 40%. Bitcoin's down like 20%. It's interesting. At the same time, you were seeing European stock markets have hit all-time highs, and the Chinese tech sector has rallied up 5% in a single day. There's a couple of things in the Chinese tech sector that have been doing really, really well. Now, when we were in Austin, you talked a lot about how overvalued the U.S. is right now, right? And I'm interested, is this kind of the shift? Do you think this is the beginning of the shift, a rotation out of the super expensive U.S. equities into some of these more, just say, more fairly valued markets?
Yes and no. Yes, because I think people are finally realizing that the U.S. is really expensive, and these markets that have been overlooked, Europe, many parts of
China's cheap.
Yeah, China's very cheap, and many parts of Asia, almost all of Latin America, it's dirt cheap. So when you look at valuations and try and separate what's going on geopolitically and in world news, if you just looked at the numbers, it's the most stark contrast you could possibly see. In fact, like 2 weeks ago, U.S. markets were at an all-time high, and PE ratios for U.S. markets blended are over 30. It's double the historical average. You can make all kinds of arguments about AI and exponential growth, and this time's different and blah blah blah. But when you look at the numbers, it makes sense as an investor to rotate into these undervalued markets. I mean, Buffett's holding the largest cash holdings, not only on a numerical level now, but the largest cash holdings percentage based he's ever had. So what I talked about in Austin was, this opportunity to rotate right now into these undervalued markets. And perhaps now is the bottom for a country like Brazil, or even like the UK, or like China. I don't know where, nobody knows where everything's going, but it's pretty damn cheap. All of that said, my saying that I say is, the U.S. is the healthiest horse in the glue factory. And despite the overvaluation of many U.S. equities and markets, broadly speaking, the U.S. is pretty well positioned to have a tremendous amount of growth for the next several decades. Our demographics aren't horrible. We have a lot of investment still coming here. We're trying to reshore a lot of our manufacturing. And the countries that we're in competition with, especially with China, their demographics look horrible, and their economic situation domestically is it's underreported by the Chinese government. It always has been, but it looks like there's more and more cracks forming. So don't forget that the U.S. is still a great place to invest. That was the takeaway at Austin. One
of the more interesting, like kind of wild theories that I heard at the dinner was that China is, let's just say, they have 400 million people that they're claiming are in their population that aren't there.
Yeah, who said that? They were saying, so the stated population of China is 1.5 billion, right? And the conversation was that it could be up to like
1.1. That like 400 million of those actually don't exist, and that they're keeping this number artificially high because they don't want people to know that their population is actually much, much, much lower than. Again, we got to fact check this. I have no idea.
Yeah. Andre brought that up. Andre was saying that, and he's over in Asia a lot, so and he, of course, looking at data we're not looking at. But I don't doubt that at all. China cooks their books on almost everything. So if that's true, if their population's that much less,
well, it's an entire United States. It's crazy. It's crazy. I think it's interesting. I think the sugar rush of this new administration is just kind of like wearing off, and there's a lot of hard stuff that needs to be done to turn the economy around, right? Cutting a lot of expense. There's a lot of things that are being done right now that are kind of like short-term pain, long-term gain, and the euphoria of a new pro-business administration coming in, I think it's just wearing off, and we're going to see some challenges for a little while until some big things happen, right? Like settling the wars, things that have been discussed that have not yet come through.
Yeah, and I forget, I saw this in the news a week or two ago about the traditional PE strategy. When a private equity company takes over another company, the model is you chop everything, but you actually chop 20% more than you need to, because you need to actually start over in a lot of areas. And if you look at the U.S., you forget about the international politics. If you look internally in the U.S. with what Doge is doing, perhaps that's part of the strategy, which is to cut back further than you think you have to, which is going to create this short-term pain, which is, again, the traditional private equity model. You take over a company, the revenue goes down for a while, operations are kind of out of control and discombobulated, and then about a year later, you rebuild it in a much better and more efficient way, and then you have that growth going forward that you didn't previously had, that was stagnated, which is why the PE company bought it, whatever company it was in the first place. And so you could look at the US right now and say, perhaps we're in that phase where we're just about to start hitting the dip, where there's this chaos going to go on, and people are going to be pissed.
I think you're seeing like a lot of, let's say, pushback from if you read any kind of mainstream media, you've got pulling out government employees, saying, "Hey, these terrible things are going on. They're cutting us. All these things, cutting these things down." And my challenge is that Elon's like rarely wrong on big things, right? The way of getting there might be completely chaotic and insane, and it might make people feel frustrated or upset, or they don't like the style. But he's very, very rarely wrong on like the big picture. And the big picture is that the US will go bankrupt if they don't turn things around, if they don't bring in more tax revenue and stop spending so much money and stop relying on so much debt. And one of the big reasons is because interest rates are higher than they were previously. And just servicing the debt is a lot more expensive than it was a few years ago, pre-COVID, or like, COVID first couple of years. And that's kind of where I fall in to anybody who's, frustrated with how things are going. Just look at the big picture. Is that changes need to be done quickly to prevent a bankruptcy. We're on a unsustainable trajectory. And if you take one of the smartest entrepreneurs of all time, the guy who came into Tesla or to Twitter and did the biggest turnaround of all time, he's probably a good person to be in charge of turning things around in the US government. And that's at the end of the day, that's just like, it doesn't matter all this back and forth of, oh, is this right or wrong, to send an email to people about what they did the week before. And it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we have to make changes. It's going to be short-term painful, because if we don't make changes, we will go bankrupt.
Right. I think a lot of people in the government right now, meaning government employees, I'm talking like lower level government employees, the park rangers, the whatever, they are, oh my gosh, I'm getting fired, or oh my gosh, I'm letting go. And the people in the corporate world are kind of smiling because they're like, yeah, welcome to our world. This happens all the time. People who have ever worked for a Fortune 500 company will tell you stories about how their entire department got axed because the CEO just changed their mind. It had nothing to do with the performance of those people, and nothing to do with the individual life situation. Oh, I just bought a house. I just moved to this town. No, they just cut it because they decided to go a different direction. And I think a lot of the government employees are getting a taste of what that's like. I'm not saying it's like a good feeling, but hello, that's how a lot of the world works. And that's what happens when things get too bloated and don't work. You kind of got to start over and cut things that are bringing everything down.
Even if you don't like the messenger, you got to respect the message, and the message is clear. Changes have to be made. It's been a spiraling debt bomb that has continued to grow and grow and grow, and it's got to change. So I think that's kind of one of the reasons why it's a weird superpower that both Trump and Elon have, that they're just completely comfortable with confrontation and saying things that piss people off, right? It's a weird superpower, but
it's like
people
that
don't
billionaire kind of egomaniacs, like sociopath. I don't know the exact label for it, but that ability for one's words just to slide off their back like a whatever, it's like a water off a duck's back, whatever it's called. They have that ability to just not care, and
which
not
is
take it
extreme disagreeability, disagreeability, right? And same thing with Churchill had, right? Churchill was wrong, quote, wrong for years and years and years, criticized by everyone. And then guess what? Things turned around, and now he's looked back on as like the most right. I want to shift gears though and dive into our adventure corner and talk a little bit about, it's interesting right now. It's February, end of February. And even though it was a frozen tundra in Austin, summer is coming up, and it's a good time to look at where are the interesting places to go this year in 2025. And so we did kind of a rundown of places we think are really exciting and interesting, that are kind of under the radar, right? Locations to go this summer and check out. I'm going to start with my number one, which is the Dolomites in Italy. I think this is one of the most underrated parts of Europe. 2 years ago, went over there with my wife, my son, some friends, and we spent about 2 weeks in a week and a half in the Dolomites. Italy is obviously extremely well known, right? It's the most touristed place in Europe, but up in northern Italy, you've got this area that has incredible hiking. It's got incredible food. It's got a mix of like German, Italian culture, which leads to these really interesting mixes of Italian food combined with like German sauna style culture. So all the hotels, when we were up in the Dolomites, you have wonderful Italian food, and then they have these incredible like sauna setups after you're hiking. You hike all day, then come back and go in these incredible saunas, and great wine, tons of incredible stuff to do. And what struck me was that there were no Americans, very few Americans there. And it's one of those places that you can go on these hikes from hut to hut to hut, where you sleep in these refugios. And when you arrive after hiking all day, they make you incredible food. You sleep in these bunks, and then you hike the next day. It's a world-class location. I think it's on the up and up and up and up and up. And I think 2025 is one of the last years when you're going to be able to go and not have it flooded. My call is it's going to be on Instagram all summer. And when that happens,
So this is a summer activity, not a winter activity.
Oh, it's summer or winter. But
okay. When you put this on the list, I was thinking this is like skiing and like snowshoeing.
No, you can go ski. You can go ski there too. There's really good skiing. But I think that the summertime is incredible because there's phenomenal hiking, and you kind of get to explore it a little bit more. When you're skiing, you're kind of like right there. Yeah. So that's my number one.
I love it. All right, number two. You do number two, then I'll take the last one.
Okay, number two, South Africa. South Africa is my second under the radar location for 2025. South Africa is one of the most beautiful countries in the entire world, and the value in South Africa is unbelievable. You can go. People don't go there because, some people go there, but it's off the like traditional American route because, well, people are afraid that it's dangerous, and it is dangerous. There are parts of it that are sketchy, especially in Joburg. But you arrive, and South Africa has like first world type amenities, incredible food, beautiful hiking, great beaches. It's got incredible nature. There's safaris.
Great surf.
It's got a very great surf. It's got big great whites. We actually did one of the most exciting things I've ever done was the great white cage diving there. So we hopped in this cage, and you get in the water, you see these great whites. They throw big chunks of tuna, and then the great whites come up and they smash it. Pretty unbelievable. You can still do that. And the reason why I think it's great up and coming for 2025 is it's still so cheap. It's like there's parts of it like Stellenbosch that are way as beautiful or more beautiful than Napa. And you go and you have a meal, and it's like $40, right? The equivalent of like a $300 meal in Napa. So, and we had Yaroslav, the wandering investor. He came on and talked about how that's his number one right now is South Africa. It's the place to go, and it is under the radar excitement for 2025. So that's on top of my list.
Love it. All right, I'll wrap it up with number three, which is, it's not a secret, but I think people don't realize how much has changed recently, which is Costa Rica. And it's really all of Central America, but I think that Americans in general are going to be spending less time going on really long flights. They're going to be staying a little bit more domestically. And that has to do with the fact that a lot of people can still work remotely.
Yeah.
And Costa Rica is kind of in the same, not kind of, it is in the same time zone as the US. And there are these communities popping up in Costa Rica that are little Americas. I've stayed at a couple this past year. I had my family down there. We did like a week in the remote jungle. It was surfing. It was great. And then we went to this like gated community. It was America. And honestly, it was pretty expensive, almost US prices in these communities. But why I wanted to mention this is because there's world-class education down there now for kids, meaning kindergarten all the way through high school, and world-class medical care. And I know a lot of families who have actually left the US to go live there full time. And I think that's probably going to be a trend that continues for quite some time as these Central American countries, especially Costa Rica, just have a better quality of life where people can kind of escape the rat race. So the opportunity to go down there now, this year, check out a place that, maybe you want to move to full time, like you go check it out because there's a lot of building, a lot of business going on down there right now.
I got multiple friends who are down there for the winter.
Okay.
Like,
there you go.
From Austin straight down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like 3.5 hour flight or something like that. So it's really, really close.
Yeah.
And
Florida is 2 hours and it's like,
I mean, you're close to everything, dude. You like from Miami down to Central America, you're always like, it's from the US. It's only, 3.5 hours to Colombia.
I grew up in California, like you in Washington.
Yeah, it's so far.
And if you look at a map, you think, oh, Latin America is just below the U.S. It's actually to the below it, and then way to the east.
Yeah.
So California to Central America is like 5-6 hours.
I know, it's crazy.
Florida's 2 hours. So me loving Latin America and spending so much time, I always flew from California, long flights now from Florida.
The main reason for Palm Beach, besides all this cheap stuff being built, is you can just access the beauty of Latin America.
Yeah, Miami, the capital of Latin America.
Dude, we are excited. We're headed to Denver for the next tomorrow morning, next couple of days to do some adventure capitalist planning. And we had a great dinner in Austin. There is talks of having another dinner in Florida beginning of May. So if you are interested in attending one of our adventure capitalist dinner series, you should go to adventurecapitalist.com, go in the contact form, and send us an email. If you're interested, there's one in Florida. It'll be the first couple days in May is what we're putting together. We want to gauge some interest and
let us know early because I felt bad for the Austin dinner. We had to turn away probably 10.
We had like 10 people that were on the wait list. So if you're available or in the area, reach out now, and we're putting it together. And really, like the main pitch for these is that we bring together really interesting folks. I mean, I'll give kind of this one in Austin. We had everyone from a Navy SEAL to a guy who does business in El Paso and Juarez back and forth and runs these large manufacturing companies. We had elite athletes. We had people in the finance industry. We had this whole range, and we left that super inspired, super connected, and just kind of feel like there's more opportunity when you are connected with other people who think the same way and do big things. So if you're interested, adventurecapitalist.com, hit us up. Thank you for listening today, and we'll be back on next week's episode.
See ya.